I feel a combination of things. I feel sometimes I am totally ridiculous because of how old I am, and other times that I am completely out of my skin because I'm somebody who never dances in public. If I go to a wedding, you'll never see me dancing. So there I have to be like a dancing maniac. And I try to imagine myself as some rock and roll person who has just done a lot, too much acid or something, and is still dancing away on stage there and thinking she's a flower child from the 60s. Only now it's 40-something years later, so.
I mean, is that the power of the rock and roll fantasy? Is it that it allows you to be with a group of other people who are behaving and you get away with everything? Is that why it's such a big fantasy for people?
I don't know if it's the fantasy of being wild with other people. I think it's the fantasy of doing something and getting immediate response from an audience. And in that respect, I think it's terrifying. The first time I ever did it, nothing came out of my voice. I was paralyzed, especially in front of a mic. You know, it's one thing to sing in a shower, and it's another thing to sing into a live mic where people can hear every mistake in your voice amplified. I think what the reality is that it's a whole bunch of fun to do this with people you know, who you've done it a long time, and you know that you hit your songs right on at some gigs, and that the audience was right in tune with you and other gigs, and when it comes together, it's just magic. So you share an immediate high with other people.
Did you have a rock and roll fantasy when you were a teenager?
I had a fantasy that one day that the lead singer would notice me and want to go out with me. No, I don't think I ever had the fantasy that a Chinese girl would become a rock and roll star any more than I had a fantasy that I would become a published writer one day. I had none of those fantasies. And maybe it also had to do with ethnicity. It just did not seem something that I would aspire to. But I think like a lot of girls in high school, I was going after just hoping some guy would ask me to dance. Kathy sings that song, the Slut Song, about the night that, you know, nobody noticed the middle-aged women. When I was a teenager, nobody noticed me. I was the wallpaper, and nobody asked me to dance. So to go from that to being on stage and being the one who's just gyrating out there, I mean, that's pretty hilarious to me. It's pretty ironic.
Is there anything else that you can think of sort of like that has sort of roots in your teenhood or childhood that you'd still like to accomplish in your life that you haven't yet? I mean, you've started, you are a successful writer, and yet the rock and roll fantasy kind of lives on. Is there anything else?
I have always had this fantasy that I would become an artist. And I always say to myself, well, one day when I retire, but of course I'll never really retire. That's not a performance art, however. I didn't have a fantasy, but I had this assumption that I would play the piano publicly from the time I was first taking my lesson, classical piano at age 5, but I had a disastrous piano recital at age 6. And I was terrified of performing after that. And perhaps being in the rock and roll band has helped to sort of mitigate the terror and the feelings of doom, and that I'd have to kill myself immediately after embarrassing myself. I have blown it so often on songs on stage, and we just laugh. And there's no shame, because the whole thing is based on that premise that you're only having a good time. And it is not meant to be perfect. It's even better when you have spontaneous little things that happen and you recover from it in whatever funny way you can get out of it.